Bad design is the default mode, since it takes the least effort to create. We have to go back in time. It is March 2020, and one of the best sets of the year is about to release. The long-awaited Dual Overload is about to drop and hit the shelves hard. Now, for those wondering, Dual Overload was a set that was going to release a lot of cards that had not previously been in the game, essentially being our connection to the OCG's Link Reigns pack, which has different Link monsters to support the various archetypes that needed them, as this was still the era of Master Rule 4, so all extra deck monsters had to go to Link Zones. And this set carried some of the main powerful cards that would see play even up to the metagame today, ranging from the one of the most powerful cards in Crystron Halqifibrax. A lot of cards were released out of the set to complete various archetypes, such as the aforementioned Tenyi Sasahara, also 5-headed Link Dragon, but there was another Link monster with the power that rivaled even the amazing Crystron Halqifibrax. And that is the topic of today's discussion. Although a part of the very underwhelming, at least at that point, Predaplant archetype, a Link monster was introduced to support the strategy. This being Predaplant Verte Anaconda, a Link 2 monster for a fusion archetype that struggled to even mount most of its combos. This was actually a very welcomed introduction, as up until this point this deck had not seen much play, and to the thoughts of most people once first seeing the fact that they were going to get a support Link monster made us think that maybe this would be the time for Predaplants to come out of the tables. However, that would be such a tall order, as creating a Link monster for such a deck, even though not very relevant, would it be possible that this card could fix many of the problems that it had? Let's start off by looking at its effects. You can target one face-up monster on the field. It becomes dark until the end of this turn. Now I know what you're thinking, that that's not very good. However, this actually comes with its own caveats, as the Predaplant archetype itself relies on using something called Predacounters, and although Anaconda doesn't give you a Predator counter on your opponent's cards, it does give you access to something more important, because Predaplant Verte Anaconda's effects are even more than just that. You can pay 2,000 life points and send one fusion or polymerization normal or quick play spell from your deck to the graveyard. This effect becomes that spell's effect when that card is activated. Also, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn. In conjunction with the first effect, this effect was insane, as it now allowed the deck to use one of its most powerful tools, and like its anime counterpart, it uses them to steal the opponent's monsters, as with the ability to turn a monster into a dark type, Predaplants were now able to make up their resource game, which they had been lacking severely, which allowed you to use the very powerful super polymerization by sending it from your deck to the grave in order to use that effect immediately. So you were able to turbo into boss monsters such as Predaplant Chimera Reflasia, Predaplant Dracostapelia, and even Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, which is one of their boss monsters, but yeah, you don't see it that often. Now, this is just the tipping point, as although these allow Predaplants to make more of a push in this effect, this is just the beginning, as besides super polymerization, you're able to dump normal spells that are also fusion cards. So, the very powerful Fusion Destiny and Red Ice Fusion are absolutely great targets for this effect, and any others, as for the case, even something like Neos Fusion, and if it wasn't banned at the time, Brilliant Fusion, would have been perfect targets for this. As you can see, you are able to access a wider range of boss monsters to put now in Predaplants to give them the power that they need to stand up to the metagame. So if you wanted to play more of a control-focused playstyle, dealing with opponents' threats and constantly forcing them to lose resources, maybe something like Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer was the call you would want to make with Fusion Destiny, or with something like Dragoon, which can be a towers, a boss monster in and of itself, and a negate, was something amazing that Anaconda could just simply do. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering why I keep talking about Predaplants, Because if you played during this time, you're probably wondering why Predaplants didn't really see any play during this format, or the formats that Anaconda had existed. And you're probably wondering why you never heard that they had topped until rather recently. Well, there's one big problem that the Predaplant archetype had, but more importantly, there's something that Anaconda has that makes it even greater than the deck that it was supposed to support. And, as always, there's more. For being made to be a direct support to its archetype, Predaplant Verte Anaconda was strangely made generic, as it only takes 2 effect monsters to make this unbelievably powerful monster. Now, even with the low stats that it has, 2 effect monsters as its condition to summon just makes this so much more better for every single deck. As we would see combo heavy decks of the format, such as Phantom Knights, finally having an end piece to their board that by using 2 additional monsters that they just had laying around anyways, you could go ahead and add a negate to your board if you want a Dragoon, or even the very annoying pop that Destroy Phoenix of Force are added, as DPE definitely fit into these decks well. Even a combo heavy deck such as Drytron would use this engine as well, as now any of your additional monsters could be definitely turned into this powerful Anaconda, and Anaconda could be turned into Dragoon or even DPE as before. And even a deck like Prank Kids that was extremely powerful on its own could run this if needed, for the sole fact that adding any of the disruptive monsters I named before would just bolster a strategy even better. In a combo deck that was already good, that just had 2 additional monsters, basically made this fantastic. And for this sole reason, Anaconda became a problematic card, and a very powerful dominant in the metagame, as Anaconda essentially could do any of those such things. And even better, in other archetypes, it wasn't even that bad, as you could play this in like a lower power scale deck, utilizing its effect to send something even like Neos Fusion if you wanted to summon a Neos Fusion monster from the extra deck. The point is, Predaplant Verte Anaconda was just super powerful. As I mentioned before, any deck now had access to Super Poly if they wanted. They had access to their fusions, and something that basically made it really strong. When we look at the stats for Anaconda, we can really see that here, as effectively it being an attribute changer, which on the honesty, it's not really the most useful effect, but it did come up. Its ability to use powerful effects besides its own is just absolutely insane, because these are some of the best cards in the game that it could just effectively utilize, and you could just run 1 copy if you wanted, because now you finally had a way to run these powerful engines without having to have to run 3 copies. That's just nuts. And the fact that it's a super generic monster just makes Anaconda so much more powerful, as now you don't even have to worry about not being able to make it. There's nothing that stops it except for the fact if you need 2 monsters, and that by itself is easy to do for most decks. Now, meaningfully, it's not all Anaconda's fault. Although it being super generic, other decks really need to be powerful in order to use it. This is where I say it's not necessarily the fault of Predaplants not being able to use it. They could have used Anaconda, but the sad truth is, what benefit could they get from it? Besides summoning Dragoon to protect their board, the deck already needed way more help, and it definitely needed another wave of support before this card could have even tried to help. However, most people wondered when it would end, as during this period of time, this was unfortunately during the global crisis we were having, so unfortunately our formats were very long, and there was not really much change in the metagame because, well, most of us couldn't go outside. And I remember at my locals, which was luckily open because it could be outdoors, a really interesting time in my life playing Yu-Gi-Oh! That was that Anaconda could be fit into any deck. And any deck that wanted to run it while it was legal, they definitely would. As effectively, once your board was established, or even as just a generic monster with the fusion engine teched in, it was just a way to get access to it. I even remember facing this in my locals tournament against a guy playing Salamangreat, when all of a sudden I was like, okay, well, what's he going to do? Because he had basically set up for a wolf. So I'm like, wolf, he goes for an Anaconda, and I just dropped my jaw because I was like, oh, well, there's probably a Dragoon coming my way because this is before Burst of Destiny, and oh yeah, I was right. He dropped Anaconda. Or he dropped Dragoon. So, yeah, the point is, this card was just really strong in any deck it touched. However, this reign of terror cannot last forever, and we would eventually see it come to an end. As the May 2022 ban list came around, and since Anaconda's existence for almost 2 years, it finally entered the ban list. And it finally would join many other cards that had preceded it. However, the discussion on Anaconda is actually a very important one, as although this card was extremely strong and absolutely broken by all definitions, there were some situations where Dragoon Anaconda really just didn't do anything. And the reason I say this is that although Anaconda was strong, its existence for 2 years in the game wasn't necessarily because, we couldn't have a ban list. It wasn't even just to sell more of it as a reprint. It was just that Anaconda by itself, when you look at it, is a powerful card that does something powerful, but only in certain formats. As Anaconda, in this current time, would it be technically broken? Absolutely, because our format's still kind of similar to how it was before. But the point is, its effect was really strong, but didn't make it the powerhouse that you would think by its own. It really had to benefit from decks that were already strong. And by itself, it was still something that, although looking frail, was too powerful to be left in the metagame. As at any time, it did something that was just ridiculous. 2 monsters equaling any type of boss monster, whether it was really strong or really good, would limit the future designs. And unfortunately for Predaplant Verte Anaconda, its death was by its own design. Now this is Brad from the Ad Army signing off. And for all of you out there to sign on.